The river of Nile, the world's longest river, was home to one of the world's greatest civilizations, which lasted for thousands of years. Its remarkable endurance, spanning thousands of years, included the rise of pharaohs, the construction of monumental buildings, and the creation of a complex society. The Nile River sustained the fertile land around it, allowing the population of Egypt to increase in number. Ancient Egypt's timeline covers several distinct periods. The pre-dynastic period lasted from 6000 BC and lasted for almost 3000 years. The early dynastic period, from late 4th millennium until the middle of 3rd millennium BC. It witnessed the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. The Old Kingdom that lasted during the second half of 3rd millennium BC was highlighted by incredible pyramid construction. The New Kingdom that lasted during the second half of the 2nd millennium BC came after, bringing in an era of imperial expansion with great pharaohs such as Hatshepsut, Thutmose III and Ramses II, leaving a long-lasting mark. The third intermediate period and the late period that lasted during the 1st millennium BC were defined by political collapse, foreign invasions, and cultural turbulent times. Religion in ancient Egypt influenced all aspects of society, leaving the concept of religion as a single, unified system nearly meaningless. Religion transformed significantly over thousands of years. However, despite the progress of time, it maintained outstanding continuity. Religion under these circumstances exceeds conventional conceptions limited to the worship of gods and human piety. Instead, it consists of a wide range of behaviors, including contacts with the dead, prophecies, oracles, and the spiritual realm of magic, which frequently focuses on religious aspects and symbols. Public religion was dominated by two primary themes: the pharaoh, who stood between people and gods, and a pantheon of deities in many shapes and forms. Important among these deities was the sun god, that had numerous names and aspects, and is linked to the solar cycle that represents the cycle of night and day. The Egyptian religious cosmos developed as a spiritual system that includes the gods and the worlds of humans. However, the surrounding chaotic world has jeopardized the cosmic balance. The ruler, as the central figure of the human world, is responsible for ensuring the gods' generosity and keeping order in the face of increasing chaos. Despite this inherent pessimism, the monuments portrayed an optimistic image of eternal balance and cooperation between the ruler and the gods. This intentional contrast solidified the fragile order and increased the position of the pharaoh. Monuments and historical sources provide significant information on the religious views of the elite in ancient Egypt. However, ordinary people's beliefs and their everyday religious activities are not so apparent in comparison to elites. We will start our journey by looking at the early history of Egypt and its earliest traditions and beliefs. The origins of Egyptian religious practices date back to prehistoric times, when archaeological evidence were scarce and obscure. The pre-dynastic period provides insight into the ancient Egyptians' emerging religious views, as evidenced by burial traditions that suggest an early belief in an afterlife. At the same time, the ritual burial of animals during this period suggests the early stages of zoomorphic deities, a distinct feature that would later define ancient Egypt's religious culture. Although reliable artifacts representing deities in human shape are scarce at this early time, it is possible that anthropomorphic gods appeared gradually, distinguishing them from their zoomorphic counterparts. There were signs of local patron deities emerging throughout Egypt's territory. Nevertheless, invasions and integration among different communities also led to the spreading of myths, tales, folklore, and religious beliefs throughout Egypt. The conquered region's gods and religious traditions may be absorbed into the victor's pantheon or fully embraced by it, adding to the diversity of Egyptian religious beliefs. The early stages of Egyptian religion, defined in the pre-dynastic period, set the foundation for the variety of beliefs that would spread during the following dynastic periods. The transition into the early dynastic period around 3000 BC marked Egypt's unification, resulting in a major transformation in its religious and cultural life. With the consolidation of the government, certain gods rose in popularity, and worshipping the divine pharaoh became central to sacred ceremonies. God Horus, who was closely associated with the ruling monarch, gained importance, and his cult, centered at the upper Egyptian city of Nekhen, became a religious center. Simultaneously, the city of Abydos developed as another important center, witnessing the construction of enormous funeral buildings by early pharaohs. The Old Kingdom represents a turning point in the development of the Egyptian religion, marked by organized attempts to establish a pantheon of leading gods to be organized around a specific center. An example of this includes the Ennead, or Great Ennead of Heliopolis, a collection of tales that connected important gods, including Adam, Ra, Osiris, and Set, to a single origin story. This was an organized project aimed to simplify the religious practices of various gods in large central cult centers. At the same time, the Old Kingdom saw the dramatic transition from mastabas to pyramids, along with large-scale funerary temple complexes as the pharaoh's chosen tombs. The relatively modest appearance of the gods' temples, compared to the magnificence of the pyramid complexes, highlighted the importance of the cult of the supreme ruler over the worship of local deities. The god of the sun, Ra, who was worshipped dating back to the early dynastic period, climbed in popularity. Ra's status grew, and his cult center at Heliopolis became the most important religious place in the country. Ra gained importance during the 5th dynasty and established complex ties with both monarchs and the afterlife, a position he held throughout ancient Egyptian history. At the same time, Osiris became known as a significant god of the afterlife, having an impact on the famous pyramid texts, a collection of texts from this era. These writings, which represent a complex mix of solar and afterlife ideas, combined with fragments from previous traditions, provide priceless insights into early Egyptian theology. Symbolism was at its height at this time. The symbol of a solar disk with hawk wings was first connected to Horus in the city of Edfu. During the Old Kingdom, the solar disk was decorated with additional elements, most notably sacred cobras on both sides, while temple ceilings and sacred doorways were decorated with a winged disk, a symbol of protection. A period of instability happened when the Old Kingdom collapsed into the chaos of the First Intermediate Period in the 22nd century BC. Under the patronage of the pharaohs from the city of Thebes throughout the Middle Kingdom, Egypt was eventually reunited. These pharaohs initially supported the god Montu. However, the theological landscape changed as god Amun took power. Religiosity of individuals became more important during the Middle Kingdom period and found textual expression. This development persisted even into the New Kingdom that followed right after. Therefore, the Middle Kingdom marked one stage in the development of religion and prepared the way for subsequent changes in the story of ancient Egyptian spirituality. The Middle Kingdom's rise and fall prepared the way for the turbulent Second Intermediate Period, during the middle of 2nd millennium BC, which saw a breakdown of Egyptian stability. However, the pharaohs of city of Thebes, who ascended as the leaders of a revived Egypt, orchestrated an end to hostility in the realm that marked the beginning of the New Kingdom. During the New Kingdom, there were profound changes in the religious landscape, and god Amun became the most worshipped state god. Egypt's most important religious stronghold emerged from Amun's sanctuary at the Temple of Karnak in Thebes, which was fused with the god Ra, the renowned protector of dynasties. The strategic importance of Thebes played a major role in Amun's rise to significance, but the priesthood's increasing professionalism also played a major role. Using elaborate theological discourse, these scholars created detailed descriptions of Amun's power, therefore establishing his dominance in the pantheon of gods. Increased contact with foreign civilizations expanded the New Kingdom's horizons and encouraged the incorporation of many Eastern gods into the Egyptian pantheon. However, under the reign of Pharaoh Akhenaten, previously known as Amenhotep IV, who defied tradition and made the god Aten the only state god, the peace of religious order was suddenly interrupted. This announced the beginning of the Amarna period, an important turning point during which Akhenaten centered worship upon himself, portraying the Aten god as distant and impersonal. The population, which secretly stayed true to their traditional gods, found little connection with the Atenist system since it lacked a well-developed mythology and ideas about the afterlife. The country's support for the other deities was denied by Akhenaten, causing social turmoil that undermined the foundation of Egyptian religious life. Nevertheless, his successors tore down the newly established theological system, realizing the damage caused by the Atenist experiment. After the Atenist monuments were demolished, the traditional pantheon regained dominance once again. Even though this was an exception, the Amarna period turned out to be a brief chapter in the vast history of Egyptian religion. Following the Atenist failure, personal relationships between worshippers and their gods experienced an increase in popular religion. Now acknowledged as the highest god, Amun took the position of the final decider of human fate. This was a major shift that decreased the importance of pharaohs in the eyes of the people of Egypt. Oracles were well known as instruments for making decisions and as channels for heavenly guidance. The religious leaders who deciphered these prophecies experienced an increase in wealth and influence which helped to reshape the social landscape. This turbulent time helped to revive the idea that gods were directly involved in human affairs, but it also created the conditions for the new kingdom's eventual collapse. A fascinating chapter in the history of Egyptian spirituality was opened by the careful balancing act between tradition and transformation, which created a dynamic interaction between the divine and the mortals. In ancient Egypt, religion was not a static phenomenon. Rather, it changed, adjusted, and merged with everyday life. The pharaohs played the role of being a cornerstone of both heavenly harmony and earthly order. Beginning around 3100 BC, the late pre-dynastic period, the foundation of the Egyptian state was the institution of the pharaoh and the faithful obedience of officials to the ruler. The king's central political status was reflected in his predominant role in religion. The pharaoh took on a supernatural personality in the eyes of the rest of the Egyptian population, taking on the traits of several earthly gods. The king's divine position was further reinforced by the emergence of titles like Perfect God and Son of Ra, which emerged during the 4th dynasty and evolved throughout time. Perfect God regarded the king as a subordinate deity who was made perfect by his succession to the throne, while Son of Ra established a close but dependent relationship with the primary god, Ra. Standing in a middle position between the gods and the people, the pharaoh was showered with praise from the gods. The pharaohs pursued divinity in the afterlife, but their human side continued to exist. Despite the varying influence and power of each pharaoh, their divinization was limited based on their achievements, character, and the length of time their royal cult persisted. Although some monarchs, like Ramses II and Amenhotep III, strived to become divinities while still alive, and some succeeded in becoming gods after death, these examples highlighted the limitations of royal divinity. That is because different pharaohs had different levels of success and achievement during their reign. Therefore, they were respected among people accordingly. The gods, monarchs, humans, and the dead were all dancing on the cosmic stage. The universe was created by the creator deity out of primordial chaos, and all living things, aside from the creators, would eventually die. The universe, while organized, floated on the verge of upcoming disorder, and the sun god, growing older, needed daily resupply. The pharaoh's cosmic function surpassed social borders. The cosmic order depended on the people's obedience to him. The idea of Maat, which stands for cosmic order, justice, truth, and generosity, was central to Egyptian philosophy. It was the ruler's job to bring Maat into order from disorder or Isfat, a duty that exceeds political and even divine domains. Maat developed into a physical force and was worshipped as a goddess, the daughter of the creator. In different goddess cults, the king offered Maat as a symbol of the complex relationship between humans, the ruler, and the gods. Maat's power expanded to the afterlife, where a person's destiny was decided by the weight of their heart. The emblem of Maat was weighted against the deceased heart, which stood for their deeds on earth. The idea implied that the deceased had lived a life consistent with the rules of the ordered world. The idea of Maat created a smooth link between politics, religion, and the morals of the elites. Personal ethical and religious principles increasingly drifted away from public matters over generations, reflecting the slow separation from the king and temples. Although the combination of cosmos, ruler, and Maat remained fundamental, it is difficult to determine how much of these ideas were embraced by the general public or the upper classes. Despite their architectural importance, evidence suggests that temple religion may have been restricted to a smaller number of individuals than expected. Offerings provide insights into religious rituals. They are frequently made to gods in the hopes of receiving particular blessing. Animal cults saw an increase, particularly in the late period, highlighting the dynamic and diverse range of Egyptian religious expressions. Written records from the late New Kingdom describe incidents of suffering that made people realize that had wronged a god and the belief that people were punished for their wrong deeds. The distinction between magic and religion became unclear in Egyptian religious thought, since magic was an essential component of both. In addition to being a protective factor against bad luck, magic might also be used for immoral purposes. The evidence for magical practices is diverse, ranging from complex writings to amulets, demonstrating the variety of religious beliefs. The practical implications of religion frequently strayed beyond the boundaries of temple grounds. Rituals, prophecies, and predictions were used to attempt to make sense of life's complexities, solve tragedies, and solve mysteries. Egyptian thinking put a strong emphasis on the afterlife, as seen by tomb inscriptions and funerary customs that emphasized the afterlife. Offerings to the deceased declined over time, but a variety of customs and beliefs that reflected a deep understanding of the afterlife remained. The gods were not distant impersonal beings in ancient Egypt. In fact, they were deeply integrated into everyday life, guiding and guarding people. These gods were related to one another, and their activities in the natural world were explained by a rich mythology. The complex polytheistic structure of ancient Egyptian religion anticipated a universe in which gods and goddesses were fundamental to the formation of existence as such. In contrast to the monotheistic beliefs, the Egyptian pantheon consisted of a varied range of entities, each possessing distinct qualities, roles, and local importance. The word god, or netir, in ancient Egypt covered a wide range of entities, including what we might consider to be demons in other contexts, and went beyond what we might consider to be traditional deities. These gods were not all-knowing or all-powerful, despite their immense beyond-human grasp power. They interacted dynamically with the world of mortals, demanding adoration and sacrifice from believers. The popularity of god Amun, the local deity of Thebes, gradually increased throughout the kingdom. A human figure, symmetrical feathers, and a short skirt were among the symbolic items that were used to depict him. Amun became the ruler of gods when he united with Ra, the solar god. His national prominence was established by ancient Rome, which identified him with Jupiter, and ancient Greece, which identified him with Zeus. Amunet, or Amunet, the goddess of the wind and life, was worshipped in Thebes and Hermopolis. She appeared as a serpent or as a woman with a red crown. In the Hermopolitan interpretation of the ancient Egyptian creation myth, Amunet was one of the 8 primordial Egyptian deities. The only other 2 primordial gods to achieve independent significance throughout multiple dynasty periods were Amunet and her primordial partner, Amun, who symbolized the invisible essence of the chaos void that existed prior to the earth. With the head of a jackal, Anubis arose as a guardian of deity of cemetery grounds, watching over tombs and directing embalmers through the holy rituals. The goddess of pleasure and love, Hathor, is frequently portrayed as a cow or a lady wearing a cow horn headdress, signifying her material ties to royalty. She was closely associated with motherhood. The son of Osiris and Isis, the god Horus, had the shape of a man and the head of a falcon. During their worldly existence, kings felt related to him. The goddess of magic, Isis, was important to Heliopolis cosmology. She created the first mummy by restoring Osiris. Isis and Osiris had a son, Hathor. As the god of agriculture and fertility and the perpetrator of the Nile floods, Osiris emerged into a mummified figure as the lord of the underworld and the savior of death. From around 2000 BC onward, it was believed that all men, not just rulers who had passed away, were connected to the Osiris after they died. Ptah was a creator god, a maker of things and a patron of craftsmen. Originally worshipped only in Memphis, the Egyptian capital from the first dynasty onward, Ptah cults spread over the entire country due to the Memphis' strategic importance. He was one of the 3 gods known as the Memphite Triad, along with his partner Sekhmet and the young deity Nefertari. He was shown as a man dressed like a mummy with a short, straight, fake beard and skullcap. Ra, the god of the sun and life. Within the Egyptian pantheon, he is among the most ancient deities. Ra means sun in ancient Egyptian. Ra is mentioned for the first time in the pyramid texts in the 3rd millennium BC. The city of Heliopolis was the center of his origins. Known as the self-created one, he is portrayed in the creation myth as the god who was also often called Atum, who creates the universe, establishes order and gives birth to the other gods, while standing above turbulent waves of chaos. Almost universally, he is shown as the male falcon-headed figure with a sun disk above his head. Goddess of war and medicine, Sekhmet is frequently pictured as a woman with a lion's head, dressed in red to symbolize the blood of warriors. The god of the underworld, Seth, represented a wide range of different animals and was associated with the storms and instability. According to mythology, Seth and Osiris were brothers. Rituals, offerings, and acts of devotion were required to ensure their placement in cult images and maintain the reciprocity between the divine and human realms. Gods like Nath, Sekhmet, and Mut were among the gods who were highly contradictory, representing both the kind and the terrifying. The characters of the gods were as varied as their forms and manifestations. Many of them were connected to specific animals, each of which represented a distinct aspect of the god's personality. For gods, the falcon and bull were very common, and the cow, cobra, vulture, and lioness were symbols for goddesses. The forms of the Egyptian gods were not permanently defined. They could take on various names and forms. The sun god Ra, for example, might take the form of god Khepri at sunrise, Horajti at noon, and Adum at sunset. Ra's daily journey represented the never-ending cycle of life and death, which was reflected in these various forms. The gods were not limited to abstract roles. Instead, they were associated with particular location and centers of worship. In Heliopolis, god Ptah was worshipped the most. In Memphis, it was god Amun, and in Thebes, the sun god Ra. Every god had a basic shape and form, frequently associated with a specific animal. The gods were grouped in different ways. The Ogdoad of Hermopolis was an assembly of 8 gods that represented the chaos that existed before creation, while the ancient Ennead was a group of 9 deities. Triads, which consisted of a god, a goddesses, and a young god, were common and demonstrated the Egyptian preference for symbolic representations that resembled the structure of a family. One distinctive feature of Egyptian religion was syncretism, which involved combining the names of 2 or more gods to create an integrated identity. Amun-Ra, the combination of the gods Amun and Ra, is a prime example of this merging. Individual cults of the original gods remain despite all these syncretic identities. The pantheon of Egyptian gods was dynamic. As beliefs changed, new deities appeared, and others vanished into insignificance. Egyptian religious thought was fluid, as evidenced by the occasional grouping of deities based on numerical significance and syncretic relationships. Essentially, the religion of the ancient Egyptians was based on a dynamic and ever-evolving pantheon in which the gods and goddesses, with their numerous characteristics, represented the diversity of human desires and the complexity of the natural world. Ancient Egyptian religious myths provide a unique window into the relationships between the gods, the universe, and human beings. In contrast to other religious traditions, Egyptian myths were expressed through hymns, rituals, temple scenes, and specialized texts rather than being widely documented in narrative form. Interestingly, the narrative genre never achieved the highest literary status and took a long time to develop. The sun god's cycle of travel through the sky and the underworld is a powerful illustration of the mythic foundation. The stages of a person's life were compared to the larger cosmic cycle: creation, maturity, decay, and regeneration. This solar journey is well described in the underworld books that were discovered engraved in the tombs of the New Kingdom kings. These compositions were mostly visual, but they contained hundreds of names of gods, godlike creatures, and other beings that accompanied the sun god. There aren't many written records of these stories, but they may be underlying myths from the early dynastic period. Remaining mythological stories from the New Kingdom include tales of the sun god ruling the earth, Horus' early years, and adaptations of the Osiris myth featuring new heroes. In one story, Isis wanted to find out what was the secret name of the sun god Ra, and using a magical substance, she summoned a snake that bit him and revealed the information she was looking for. Ancient Egyptian religious customs revolved around cults honoring particular gods. Temples functioned as smaller versions of the wider world, reflecting its structure. The priesthood, which became increasingly important over time, carried out ceremonies to preserve the reciprocity between the worlds of the gods and humans. As cults became more significant over time, professional priests began to appear. The complexity of the rituals encouraged a sense of community among priests by drawing more members to the cult. Women participated actively in the worship of the goddess Hathor, and many of them led the title of chantress in the New Kingdom, where they contributed to musical cult performances, despite the fact that men have historically held the majority of the priests' roles. Events where people had a chance to communicate directly with the gods were festivals. Festivals offered occasions for people to communicate with gods directly. The king used oracles as one kind of communication to ask gods for approval of his plans. In addition to public recreation of popular myths and communal celebrations, festivals served to strengthen the bond between gods and people. Essentially, Egyptian myths served as the foundation for the civilization's religious practices and beliefs, despite not being broadly narrated. Myths and cult practices depicted the dynamic relation between gods, rituals, and the cosmic order. The idea of life after death was perceived by the ancient Egyptians as something that went beyond the boundaries of this world. According to their convictions, dying was a natural part of life's cycles rather than its end. This journey represented a passage from the material world to the afterlife, where the soul, or Ba, and vital energy, or Ka, which are the immaterial aspects of a person's identity, continued to exist. The idea that the physical body or the remains of the deceased had to remain intact was central to this belief system. Without it, there could be no eternal existence for the soul or the energy of life. The custom of mummification, which is specific to ancient Egyptian religion, originated from this belief. A complex process that included desiccation, organ removal, and embalming, mummification was one thought to be a magic curtain that would grant access to eternal life. Besides mummification, funeral traditions included placing different items in the tombs of the deceased. These items performed several roles. Some were protective amulets, while others were thought to be necessities for the person in the afterlife. The quantity and quality of the deceased's funerary possessions were a reflection of their status and wealth. The funerary texts, the oldest of which are the pyramid texts, are among the most notable pieces of Egyptian literature. During the Old Kingdom, spells were written on the walls of royal pyramids with the intention of giving pharaohs the ability to travel to the afterlife and join the gods. New funerary texts, like the coffin texts and the well-known Book of the Dead from the New Kingdom, appeared over time and frequently included numerous illustrations or brief narratives. The funerary texts, whether inscribed on pyramids, coffins, or papyrus, contain instructions and descriptions of the afterlife. The coffin texts detail the underworld, offering guidance on overcoming its hazards. In the New Kingdom, books of the Netherworld, like the Book of Gates and the Book of Caverns, depicted the soul's journey through the realm of the dead, originally reserved for pharaonic tombs, but later used more widely. Preservation of the body was crucial for the survival of the soul. Initially, the Egyptians relied on natural mummification in desert burials. But as they moved to using tombs for additional safety, complex embalming techniques became apparent. Some people were left to be buried in desert graves because of their inability to pay for the process of mummification, which varied in quality depending on the cost. The mummy was taken to the tomb by a funeral procession that included priests, friends, and family following the mummification procedure. Priests carried out rituals, such as the opening of the mouth ceremony, prior to burial in order to revive the senses of the deceased. In mortuary chapels, food offerings were regularly made to the deceased. However, this custom gradually faded as families began to overlook their long-dead relatives. Changes in society are reflected in the way that burial customs changed in ancient Egypt. Mastabas were the original tombs, and during the Old Kingdom, they developed into pyramids. But most pharaohs were buried in rock-cut tombs by the time of the New Kingdom. Tombs possessed plenty of objects, such as furniture, clothing, amulets for magical protection, human figurines to be used in the afterlife, and statues. The majority of historical sources originate from the elite and royal funerary monuments, and they provide only limited knowledge about common burial customs. The purpose of funeral preparation was to guarantee a secure transition to the afterlife, indicating pre-dynastic burial practices about belief in an afterlife and the pathway to it. Later on, mummification highlighted how important it was for the body to survive into the afterlife. The focus of religious life shifted towards temples and more collective forms during the first millennium BC, corresponding to the decline of mortuary practices. The tradition of providing for the deceased continued despite uncertainty about the afterlife. The belief in an afterlife took many forms, whether it was based on the underworld, among the stars, with the sun god, or in the vicinity of the tomb. Notably, there were many challenges on the path to the afterlife. One such trial is described in chapter 125 of the Book of the Dead, where the fate of the departed is decided by their own devotion to Ma'at. The idea of moral punishment in the afterlife endured. The template in ancient Egypt served as one of the key religious components. It served as a center of society and a place of worship, in addition to having multiple functions in both religious and secular aspects of Egyptian life. In contrast to buildings from many other religions, Egyptian temples were unique because only pharaohs and priests, acting as the bridge between the gods and the populace, were allowed to enter them. In Egyptian civilization, the role of the clergy was significant, and the temple functioned as a center for administrative, medical, educational, and religious activities. The priest's responsibilities included providing daily offerings to the temple's patron god, a statue believed to represent the god's Ba, or soul. With specialized roles and positions passed down from fathers to sons, their practices and knowledge were kept secret, and the priestly hierarchy was highly ordered. Oracles were also an important part of Egyptian religion, handled by priests who were communicating with the gods on everything from political issues to everyday queries. Whether they were conducted inside a temple or in specially designed sacred buildings, oracles played a major role in temple activities. The Oracle of Amun at Siva was one of the most famous of the above, and Alexander the Great is believed to have reached out to it. The temple practiced a broad range of rituals, from solely priest-led daily rituals to more complicated ceremonies and formal celebrations. One such occasion was the Opeth festival held at the Karnak temple, which included a procession of the Theban triad for the gods Amun-Ra, Mut, and Khonsu. The purposes of temples differed. Such involved funeral temples for pharaohs who had passed away and temples honoring patron gods, although the lines between these purposes were unclear because of the close associations between pharaohs and gods. Most people followed their own religious customs, but temples controlled by the state were essential to the longevity of the god's presence in Egyptian culture. The Old, Middle, and New Kingdom all saw changes to the temple plan, which represented a transition from the world of humans to the world of gods. The buildings outside of the temple centers included outside structures such as workshops, stores, and libraries that increased the temple's income. The pharaoh was supposed to perform temple rituals during the Old and Middle Kingdom, but in reality, priests were the ones that performed them on most occasions. As the wealth of the temple increased, professional priesthood emerged in the New Kingdom, undermining the pharaoh's authority. In addition to priests, temples employed craftspeople, laborers, musicians, and chanters, resulting in the creation of important economic centers that were built around the temple. The rituals practiced in temples had different characteristics and included daily offerings, ceremonies, sad festivals that honored the rule of pharaoh, and other rituals that were either unique to a specific temple or carried out across the country. Daily rituals were widespread, but festivals offered chances for ordinary people to participate and receive pieces of offerings. There is limited evidence that temple religion is practiced widely, and large temples could dwarf smaller sanctuaries. Temples developed into significant political and economical institutions thanks to donations and royal estates. The late period witnessed an increase in animal cults, including the mummification and burial of animals, in addition to conventional cult temples. Egyptian religion was interconnected with magic, which is important to mention because sometimes it made it difficult to distinguish between magical and religious activities. The members of the clergy were mostly drawn from families connected to particular cults or temples, creating a continuity that kept them informed about local issues as well. After acquiring thorough education, priests and priestesses oversaw temple complexes, carried out rituals, and performed a variety of duties, such as those of physicians, healers, astrologers, scientists, and dream interpreters. Only the chief priests had direct contact with a patron god. Other areas were off limits to worshippers, who were attended by lower-ranking clergy. The teachings in the temples were in line with ideas found in texts such as the Pyramid texts, the Coffin texts, and the Book of the Dead, which guided the soul in the afterlife. In Egypt, religious festivals were not only social gatherings, but also essential components of religion, combining holy elements with everyday life. Festivals ranged from large-scale commemorations of gods such as Amun to more intimate gatherings for regional deities. During these festivals, the gods' statues were brought into the community. There was no strict distinction between the sacred and secular during festivals in the religious structure of the ancient Egypt. Everything about life was discussed plainly, from blessings and prayers to offerings and sexual activity. All age groups and social classes participated in the festivals, which furthered the integration of religious life into Egyptian society on a daily basis. Egypt was less powerful at the start of the first millennium BC than it had been during the height of its power in previous centuries. The goddess Isis transformed during this time period, becoming a symbol of protection, magic, and personal salvation. With time, Isis climbed to the top of the Egyptian pantheon and became the most important goddess in Egypt. Egypt developed into a Hellenistic state in the 4th century BC, with the Ptolemaic dynasty ruling from 305 to 30 BC. These pharaohs took on the power with no difficulty, maintaining the old religion and renovating a large number of temples. Cross-cultural syncretism was encouraged by the Greek ruling class, which identified with the Egyptian gods and merged them with their own religious traditions. Serapis was a god who combined Greek features with those of Osiris and Apis, with the result of this union, and was highly regarded by the Greek people. The Egyptian gods still maintained their uniquely Egyptian identities despite this fusion. When Egypt became a province of Rome in 30 BC, the religious scenery of the Ptolemaic era remained largely intact. The captivating appeal of the goddess Isis cult surpasses the boundaries of Egypt, fascinating both Greeks and Romans. However, as the Roman Empire declined, official temples entered a period of decline. Religious practices became more localized because there were no centralized influences. At the same time, the growing power of Christianity started to change the spiritual landscape. Despite the fact that it persisted for a long time, the ancient Egyptian religion faced many obstacles. Temples at Philae, remains of the ancient times, survived into the 5th century at the very least, despite a strong Christianization. The generally accepted endpoint of organized paganism at Philae was an official closure in 537 AD, but more recent research has called this into question and suggested the practice may have ended earlier in the 5th century. The legacy of Egyptian religion did not disappear with its gradual decline. Ancient Egypt's tombs and temples, which are still standing structures, have a lasting impact on history. Symbols like the winged solar disk and the Sphinx influenced cultures in the Near East and Mediterranean. Beyond Egypt's boundaries, gods such as the god of childbirth and fertility, Bas, found new homes. Ancient Egyptian representations of the afterlife can be found in both the Greek concept of Elysium and the Christian concept of hell. Mystic wisdom from ancient Egypt served as inspiration for the mythical belief systems of the Greeks and Romans. The spirituality of ancient Egypt persisted through centuries, influencing beliefs across time even after their temples collapsed. Egyptian religion was one of the most enduring legacies of ancient Egypt, along with its temples and tombs. During the pharaonic era, its influence extended beyond the borders of the Nile and touched many cultures. Egyptian culture has maintained ancient beliefs well into the modern era, but the French campaign in Egypt and Syria in 1798 marked an important turning point in global consciousness. Egyptian religious motives began to make their way into Western art as a result of Western fascination with Egyptian monuments and imagery, which also led to in-depth studies of Egyptian beliefs. Popular culture today still resonates with this influence thousands of years old.